Welcome to God and Man. I'm your host, Sam, and I'm very glad you can join me for another episode on the podcast. On today's episode is going to be kind of like a part 2 of episode 7 that was on war. But in this episode, instead of being a bit of a broad, general approach to the topic of war and the nature of authority, today's episode is going to be on Christian participation in war, particularly having to take someone else's life. So that's what I'm going to be looking at on this episode in particular. The question is it ever permissible for a Christian to kill in the context of war as a soldier? Now, the way I'm going to approach this is we're going to be looking at 4 different things. The inherent created peace of creation, God's common grace of worldly judgment, Christian participation in judgment, and then the hope of future judgment to come. So those are the 4 things we're going to be looking at. But before we get into that, I just need to define some terms so that when I say some things, we know what we're talking about. So we're on the same page. So the first one is the word violence. Now, you can interpret that in many different ways, but the way I'm going to be using the word is its behavior or actions involving physical force that intend to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. So that's what I'm going to mean by violence. Killing is the ending of a person's existence on Earth. So it doesn't mean someone ceases to exist entirely, because we believe in life after death. Even for those who aren't Christians, there is a continuing on of the soul. And so killing in particular is focused on physical existence on Earth. The third one, soldier. So what do I mean by a soldier? It's a person who uses violence as an extension of a legitimate authority like a king or a government. Now that becomes really important, and I think if you want to talk about the idea of authority, what makes something legitimate, it'd be good to look at episode 7, because I dig into that a little bit. It is a very complex topic. Now the next term is pacifism. So it's a theological position that forbids Christians from participating in any actions that would support acts of violence in all circumstances. So they put their hands up and they do not engage in it at all. And the last one is just war theory or just war practice. So this is the theological position that outlines the Christian practice of achieving peace and justice in war, in the theater of war. That's what it aims to do. Okay, so those are all those terms. That's what I mean when I say different things here. Without further ado, we'll jump right into it now. So, the Enuma Elish. This is a creation myth that's written about the time of Genesis, a bit before, and it's a bit of an old account of how humanity has kind of thought about how creation came to be. So the Enuma Elish means when on high. It's kind of the first few words of the account. So it's a Mesopotamian creation myth. And the way it goes is that primordial god Apsu has some counselors, Mamu and Tiamat, and they clash with mutinous lesser gods. So these primordial gods, they detest these lesser gods that they've created. They don't like them. They despise them. Which again, I think that we see already a difference to Genesis 1, where God states that creation is very good. So in Genesis 1, he doesn't hate his creation. He loves it. It's very good. But anyway, Marduk, in this other creation myth, arises as a representative of the lesser gods to kill Apsu and Tiamat. So he conquers the primordial gods, and all the other ones submit to him. And so from the body of the primordial gods, Marduk creates dwellings for the other gods, and he makes the stars in their likeness. Again, I think we see an interesting point here where humanity is made in God's likeness in Genesis 1, but in this account, it's the stars. So humans don't occupy some special place in the mindset here of this early myth. So then after all of that, only then does he get to creating humanity. And it's created Humanity's created to serve the gods. Now, what's interesting to notice about this creation myth here is that it's just so pathologically human, this account of the gods, isn't it? The gods fight. And I did mention this as well, but they also have sex and they dominate the world through it and make it submissive, and through bloodshed they conquer. If you think about it, that is just pathologically human. These gods are human in nature. So it's no surprise that when humans try to write their own account of what creation looks like, of what God looks like, that they write God in their own image. It's kind of that reversal of what Genesis 1 says, where we are made in God's image. This account creates the gods in their image. And so the Enuma Elish, it's written on clay tablets, and it takes 5 tablets to actually get to the point where it creates the world, creates humanity. After all this bloodshed, all this chaos, then it gets to creation. But it's just not what Genesis 1 is like. It's not how the world actually came to be. Genesis 1 tells a completely different story. Right, there is not chaos and bloodshed and disorder. Verse 1, in the beginning, God, then creation. The first and foremost thing is it is God who is there, uncontested. Then he speaks and creation comes to be. There is no fighting, no quarreling, no bickering. There is not a backstory that leads to creation. It's just in the beginning, God, and then creation. Now, Adam, as God's representative, is there to rule and make creation submit under his desire, his will. Now, you could interpret that as, is there not conflict there then? But what it really means is that Adam is continuing in a role that he already has. He is the ruler. He rules. He has authority over it, just like God did over creation. And the idea of subduing, it's not that it's chaotic and out of control and needs to be subdued, but by tilling the land, by farming it, by bringing out of it some fruit, he's subduing it. So the language used there can be military language, but in a sense, I was reading some stuff on this. It can be like treading down on the ground, like treading out the soil. So yeah, there's not a military or a striving thing going on here. Adam is just representing God in creation, and he's bringing about fruit from the ground as he, gardens it pretty much. So here in Genesis 1, as opposed to this other creation myth and many other creation myths that share a very similar vein to the Enuma Elish, we see that the creation is made peaceful. It's made in peace, harmony. At the end of creation, God says it's very good. There is no war, no strife, no conflict inherent to creation. And now, this is a little bit of a side tangent here, but this is why something like evolution becomes a very tricky thing to believe in as a Christian, because evolution is based on the reality that things have to be killed and conquered and survive to then continue on their genetic material. Now, if that's the case, you'd have to say that violence, disorder, chaos is inherent to creation. But that's not how Genesis 1 presents creation. There is actually a theological issue with that idea of evolution. Now, I'm not going to dig into a whole thing on that. That'd probably be a good episode, but I thought it'd just be worth mentioning. So creation, it's peaceful inherently. But then sin enters the world. Adam and Eve sin, and the peace of creation is broken. And particularly, humanity as a representative of creation, it's sinful in all its assets. In every single way is humanity sinful now. So this is called the doctrine of total depravity. And not that humanity is sinful in all ways at all times in every way it could be, but that in every aspect of the human nature is not touched by sin. It's not broken, twisted, distorted by it. And so the only reason we're not sinful in all the ways we could be, it's not because somehow we've managed not to break ourselves entirely when we sinned, But we see God restrain evil by curses. So in Genesis 3, we see God curse Adam and curse Eve. Adam, the fruit of his hands is going to be laborious and hard. And so, yeah, he'll bring about good fruit, but he also brings around evil fruit. And so the curse does a way of restraining his evil. And for Eve as well, her offspring. Now, if labor is easy and not hard, she could produce loads of offspring. But instead, it's laborious and hard for her to bring offspring into the world. And so it restrains her evil. And we see that evil in Genesis 4, when she brings Cain into the world, who kills his brother. She does produce evil fruit from her hands. And then later on, we will see that Cain's descendants build cities that seem to be places of both ingenuity, human ingenuity, which is a good fruit, but also great wickedness in Lamech, who takes judgment upon himself to kill someone who injures him. And so we see this great ingenuity by their labor of their hands, but also horrible evils. And so the curses do a job of restraining man's evil. We see this again in the Tower of Babel, where God curses humanity by giving them multiple languages. And so they can't bring their heads together and produce great evils, great wickedness. But there is another judgment that I have skipped over in the middle there between Genesis 6 and 9, which is important, and we're going to be spending a good chunk of time talking about it, and that is the flood and the covenant that comes after the flood. So, I'm going to read Genesis 6, 1 to 11. It says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways." So that word for violence there, so the earth was full of violence. That's the Hebrew word Hamas. And again, a little side tangent here in world politics. You might know of a group overseas called Hamas. Their name for their organization is from this root word that means violence, which is quite intriguing. You might have friends or family that support, whether willingly or unwillingly, support this Hamas group. Their name literally means violence. They're not there to try and bring about peace. They are a violent group. Their name is based on a word meaning violence. And it's this sort of violence that humanity is characterized by here in Genesis 6. Right, so I mentioned Cain killing Abel, and then Lamech, one of his great-grandsons, kills a man just for injuring him. And so I think when we get to Genesis 6, just off the back of the story of Genesis 4 and the descendants after Cain that bring on more violence, when God says violence is all over the earth, I think we're meant to think humanity is just killing each other rampantly to assert its authority over other people. That man is like shedding man's blood all over the place. Violence is everywhere. That's, I think, what we're meant to be thinking when we read this in Genesis 6. And so that's why the flood comes. The flood comes and it wipes out man's wickedness. Wipes it out. But one man and his family finds favor, Noah. But the only issue is the wicked heart of man that causes all this violence before the flood gets washed away, but it actually still remains after the flood. And God says this, he recognizes that it's still there. And so he does something about it. And this is when we get to Genesis 9, verse 5 to 6. This is what it says. "And for your lifeblood, I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal and from every human being too. I will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind." This here is the origin of humanity's responsibility for holding others to account for murder, for killing another person. And they do this by the threat of death. Did you see that there? Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God, God has created mankind, made mankind. the fear of death is meant to stop people from considering killing another person. So this is called lex talionis, the law of retaliation. That by killing someone, I'm almost pretty much forfeiting my own life. And it is humans' responsibility to hold them accountable for that. So here, again, I want to take another quick side tangent, the death penalty. We used to look at it as an old barbaric thing of the past. And maybe there's something to that. But here we see God has instituted it as a responsibility for humans to take the life of those who take human life. And it's not that we don't care about the sanctity of human life, that we'd kill people with something like the death penalty, because the reason God gives for this is for they're made in the image of God. It's because people are made in the image of God that anyone who sheds their blood have forfeited their life. It upholds the sanctity of human life, that if you would take it, if you would so much as take someone else's life, if you would murder someone, then the cost for that is your own life. So I'm not sure the death penalty is as barbaric as we think it is. But I'll tell you the reason why I think we've wanted to get rid of it in most places, and that's because of what I mentioned earlier of sin and total depravity, is that we're not perfect. And so I think when we think about judging people and giving people the death penalty, we go, well, we could be wrong. And that's true. Like at times people could be wrong and you could put an innocent person to death. But at the same time, if we're not doing this, we're not fulfilling the responsibility God has given humanity. So I can understand why we don't have death penalty, yet at the same time, I think we need to be careful considering not having it at all. Because it would seem that God has actually given us this responsibility. All right, so God, he ordains killing to maintain peace in creation, right? That fear of death is meant to restrain man's wickedness. This horrible chaos that had broken out in the world, now it's meant to be restrained by humans. They're given that responsibility. And so it's actually only thanks to God's common grace to all people, and that's why it's called common, is it's to all people, this common gift to humanity of a interim peace, a peace that's meant to kind of maintain some sort of cohesion in creation while it's still broken and sinful, is through interim judgment. So that peace is actually maintained through judgment. Now, it's not a perfect peace and it's not a perfect judgment, but nevertheless, God does maintain some peace by these means. So what I mean by interim judgment, when I say this term, because I'm going to use it a little bit, interim judgment, I mean it's a judgment in this world, in this life, which is different to what I mean by eschatological or end time judgment. So when Jesus returns to judge the world, so the result of that judgment is eternal life or eternal death in hell. It's one or the other. Whereas this worldly judgment, this interim judgment that maintains peace, and it is a gift of God to all people, it's punishment for wrongs in this life, and it's been given to humanity as a responsibility to carry out this judgment to maintain peace until the final judgment comes. So it's a gift. This judgment, this interim judgment, is a common grace of God. It's a gift of God to all people to maintain the peace of creation because of our sin, because of the world's brokenness. And so this will be the end of the first part. I think we've covered a little bit and a lot of the groundwork before we answer the question of, can Christians participate in judgment, in this interim judgment? So that's going to be the question that's going to be answered in part 2, but this part 1 has kind of laid the foundations for that next episode. So if you'd like to, feel free to keep listening on to that one or leave it for another time. But until then, I'll catch you on the next episode of God and Man.